Nic Hyl, fashion designer, entrepreneur. She creates fashion, swimwear, resort wear. She also has a university where she trains others on, uh, the fashion industry and how to do production. We have a great conversation on fashion, the kind of do's and don'ts, why it happens, how it happens. Um, we talk about some of the things. I ask why people wear certain things, and um, you know, let's talk about sweatpants in public and things like that. Convenience versus feeling comfortable. We also have a great discussion about the fashion capital of the U.S. and how runways work and what we should look for when we're watching a runway. She has great videos, by the way, about some of her fashions and runway and her runway there. Really enjoyed this conversation. I know very little about fashion, but I feel like I know a lot more. Sustainability comes up as well, and the term that she used is try to avoid fast fashion, which is obviously, I don't know if it's obvious, but made very cheaply and expensively. And what do they do with the dyes and things like that? And, what is your cost per wear is another term she used that I was unfamiliar with. But how it happens, what's in, what's out, how do those occur? Really enjoyed this conversation with Nic Hyl. I think you will as well. I know you will as well. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. So, how does fashion and psychology intersect?
Ooh, I love that we're diving right in, and I love this question. On its face value alone, the two probably don't look like they would have anything in common.
Mm,
But
mm,
the more I do this work, the more I find that it's all psychology. And I guess the the most obvious way to me would be in understanding my customers,
hmm.
or in there's a whole study of how people buy things and why they buy things, the consumer buying psychology,
Hmm.
or how women feel when they wear swimwear, and the mental trip that that does to one's brain and their psyche and how they feel about themselves. I think the psychology of dealing with all the various personalities that I deal with in New York City to develop this product.
Hmm.
It's definitely come in handy then. There's a lot of temperaments and a lot of ego sometimes. And I'm a pretty even keeled person. I'm usually in a pretty good mood. I'm usually don't get angry. I'm not too quick to anger. Um,
But I feel a but coming.
I think it just helps me, like I do
Mm.
have a temper, but luckily in a professional setting, it's never come out. And I think that the psychology just helps me to deal with all of the personalities that I have to deal with to create a product, because at its core, psychology is the study of human behavior.
Hmm.
So, when you think about the amount of people that go into making a finished good, I have to deal with all those personalities. And I'm often grateful for that educational background when I have to deal with some of the extremes of human behavior. So for me, that's how I think they go together. But I never would have thought that. I couldn't have planned that. It was just kind of like a happy accident.
Very interesting. I have a tech services company, and I do a lot of sales. And when I find out somehow that they're a bit narcissistic, I get excited. So I said, okay, now I got to make this person look good, and I've got this sale. Right. So I turn that into, I don't really think that's psychology. I think maybe that's just understanding. But so when you're talking about psychology, uh, you're talking about the consumer of the fashion that you produce, because you're very different in that you also teach others how to make fashion companies.
True. Well, I teach others how to do production.
I see.
I teach them how to do production, which is often a very overlooked area of fashion in a lot of traditional design schools and even in the workplace. Like there's tons of companies. No fashion company goes without a production department. Every
Okay,
fashion company has a production department,
I
but
see.
it's not
What is production? I'm
the
sorry.
making of clothes,
I see.
the making more than one of a thing. So we're
Physically making it, put the material together, producing it.
building it, right?
Huh.
Costing it out, negotiating that cost, how to get what you need within a time frame that you're looking for, how to manage your supply chain, how to manage your team, how to take this idea that was only in your head and then make a tangible item with it, and then make hundreds of tangible items with it and turn a profit while doing it. um, and that's production essentially, and the core of the business of fashion. And it's really exciting, and there's definitely psychology involved in that. But when I speak about consumer buying behavior, I'm more so talking about what motivates people to buy.
Hmm.
Why they chose to buy from one brand versus another, or why we as consumers, even myself, are willing to spend whatever amount we're willing to spend um on a pair of headphones, right? Like
Hmm.
they have cheap headphones, and when I say cheap, I'm referring to price and not quality.
Right.
They have cheap headphones that we could probably get from like, CVS or Walgreens or something like that for
Hmm.
like $5 or $10. And then they have like really, really expensive ones that, sometimes cost in the thousands. What motivates the consumer to buy the $5 one versus the $1,000 one, assuming cost wasn't the thing, assuming they had the money to buy either one? Why did they choose what they chose? And understanding that is a thing that people study and do focus groups. You have large companies that do focus groups and ask consumers questions about the choices that they do with their buying or their viewing habits, or market research around these things. And companies spend a lot of money to get to the core of why we the consumer do what we do. And I don't think anyone will ever really know.
Hmm.
I think people make a lot of assumptions and they can have guesses or hypotheses, but I don't know that there's a hardcore correlation between, you know, I have money and I bought this because of this. I think sometimes it's a bit more visceral, and you buy it because you liked it and you don't know why you liked it.
Yeah, and there seems to be so many factors, right? I mean, the Oscars just happened, and you happen to see something that they were wearing, or you saw a friend wearing it, or I just happened to finish watching this Lucy, I Love Lucy Ricardo movie, and they were saying that so a typical TV show, a high rating TV show, is 10 to 15 million people watching it. I Love Lucy in the 50s was 60 million.
The
And
whole country.
Macy's, yeah, the whole country. Macy's used to be open late on Mondays. Generally, all department stores were open late on Monday. They stopped doing that because I Love Lucy was on Monday nights and nobody was coming to the store. So they shifted to Thursday. You notice even today they have department stores open late on Thursday. So just that little thing made that whole shift happen. And perhaps you're in the store late on a Thursday and you just happen to see something on the shelf that it's attracted, that it looks nice, and you think about it and you move on. My point is, as I'm done rambling, is that there just seems to be so many factors involved. What are celebrities wearing? What do you see? What's happening in our culture, music wise, politically, and it's just so many things. Like when I hear
So many.
so many, right?
So many. And I think that's why it's exciting. I think that's why working in fashion can be exciting. What
Mm,
I find really interesting though is all of those factors converged into, the melting pot of fashion that it is.
hmm.
But the way that fashion is done is very, very old school.
Really?
It's not a very hip and state of the art industry. It's a very, very outdated industry in a lot of ways. There's one of my suppliers, and I'm in New York City, and I do a lot of work in the garment district, especially during development. And one of my suppliers has like an old school cash register, like the old
Wow.
kind. And like he tallies it up on his digit, like little solar calculator, the kind that you need light in order to make it work. And then he, like, tallies it up, and then he, like, puts it in his old school register, and, like, it's the kind that looks like it was in, like, a general store from,
Wow.
like, Little House on the Prairie or something. Like, it's a really old looking, register, and he's okay with that. I have another supplier who has no computer, so you have to call if you wanna go there, and then when you go there, it's just chaos. Like, his office has where you would drop off like your sample or your pattern and your fabric and your paperwork. It's just mounds of files everywhere. And
Wow.
I remember once he lost my pattern and I'm like, where, I need my pattern. Like, where's my pattern? He's like, oh, you can go over there, go in the office and look. And I'm literally on the floor, like dumpster diving through garbage bags of pattern envelopes. And there was no filing system. There was no anything. And when I finally found it, and I'm like, "You really need a computer." And he said, "Oh, my daughter keeps saying that, but I think I'm gonna get voicemail." Like, he had, like, continued
Wow.
getting voicemail, but, like, not a computer. And to him, he didn't understand why he even needed it because his job was to cut out patterns, in fabric. So if he cuts, you know, patterns out all day and he's working with scissors and fabric and patterns, he's like, why do I need a computer? That just to him created more work in his process. He had the most expensive pair of scissors I've ever seen, but
Really?
yeah, they have them where they're like electrical and they plug in the ceiling and they almost look like a saw, but they're scissors. And you hover it over the table and it just glides through like stacks of fabric like that. And it almost like a saw cuts through the fabric, and that's how you get the shapes. And then they roll all that up and then hand it off to the factory. But he had state of the art scissors, but he had no computer.
And this is a successful environment, I'm sure. I mean, they're very
He does some of the best cutting I've ever seen.
wow. Wow. And so you mentioned before how s- a lot of fashion companies don't do their own production or don't do production.
They don't they do their production, it's necessary. Not all of them know how to manage it,
I see.
or they might outsource the management of the production. So a lot of smaller brands just starting out, we all have our bevy of skills. So
Sure.
when you're starting a business to begin with, if you're starting a fashion business and you don't understand product development or production, you're probably going to look for a factory to manage that piece of the puzzle for you. And there's plenty of factories that will absolutely do it, but you're going to probably pay a little bit more than what you could if you did it in house. As you grow and you become a larger brand, you'll stop relying on the factory to do that part and you'll probably just hire people to do that in house. So now you'll have like a production department. I think my biggest asset, or one of the biggest assets that I bring, to my company is when I was working in the fashion industry, I worked in product development and production. So, in addition to being a designer, I can create my ideas and bring them to life, and then I'm also able to manage the production of the styles that I
Hmm.
create. So I can do a lot more in house and save a ton. It's also great because when my factories tell me something, I understand what they're saying to me. There very much is um, a jargon that happens in this industry as
Hmm.
you're, making things. I understand what's being said to me, and I know what questions to ask when what's being said doesn't make sense,
Hmm.
or if they're quoting me prices that just seem absurd. Like, well, what's driving this cost? If I didn't know any better, I would have to accept what they're saying to me.
Hmm.
But when I recognize that I'm being overcharged, I can ask for a breakdown of what's going into that cost. And if I know I can get it for a better price, I'll just say, "Oh, well, don't worry about that. We'll do that in house." And then I'll send it to you. And then I save myself hundreds or thousands.
Very nice.
I really
It would
like
s
that.
Yeah, very nice. It would seem to me that, production and even with this other gentleman you talked about were just kind of, just, storing and recording things in computers. That seems to me the separation between art and science, and perhaps there are some that are much better artists that aren't closer to science, or some that could do both, and some can do others, and so you need those 2 different skills to be successful in business. It just seems there's a separation there that seems to stand out by what you're describing.
You're a very astute individual, and that's how it feels.
Yeah.
And as someone who, when I studied that psychology degree, I was a psychology major and a forensic science minor, and
Hmm.
I have a ton of science under my belt. And I would say that you described it perfectly. It's literally where science and art meet, and that might be why I love it so much,
Hmm.
because there's always a question to ask or something to investigate, or curiosity abound. And then there's also the freedom that you get with creativity and being able to not have rules or constraints. And I really love the combination of the two of them.
It's fascinating. I do too. I just play a little bit of guitar and like a lot of music, but then I'm also very scientific and I have technology. I like technology and I like things in a certain order. So perhaps that's rare. Perhaps we're both rare, Nick. I'm not
We're
sure.
unicorns. It's me and you against the world.
Let's take them on. Let's go back to fashion. Like when I hear things like, I know when you look at me, you think I know a lot about fashion, but I really don't. But when you things like the fall colors or things like this or what's in and what's out, who makes this stuff? Who decides that?
Such a good question. So much of that, I think there's two answers. I think when it's a little bit more scientific,
Mm,
you have people called trend forecasters, and their job is to study people and to see what is trending, almost like you would if you were, they have trend analysis at the stock market, and people who study what's happening with the stocks. You have people who do the same exact thing with fashion, and
hmm.
that would also apply to colors, and they charge a lot of money for their services. And that's one way to go about it. You're more expensive, I should say, companies that have the budget are probably investing to some degree in a trend forecasting service or program. If that's not the way that somebody did it, another way to go about it would be something like what you touched on before with the Oscars. You can observe. So this is where you get into your fashion cycle, and it's almost like a bell curve. And at the very beginning of that bell curve, you have your early adapters and your influencers, in the true sense of the word, people who are being presented with what's new and what's off the runway because their position in society affords them that luxury. And everybody that's at the top of the curve or the bottom of the curve pays attention to what's happening at the beginning of the curve. And because we can see that Alexander McQueen had a lot of purple running on their runway,
Hmm.
then we can start to say maybe purple is a color that we need to invest in. Or because we saw that on the Oscars, everybody was wearing, I actually didn't watch the Oscars this year, so I don't know what color everyone was wearing.
Mhm.
But if there was a trend in color, like let's say of our best dress list, of the 10 best dressed people there, 8 of them had on the color gold, then we could probably start to make some assumptions about, well, if the early adapters are wearing gold, then we can probably, bet a dollar that we're going to start to see gold in a lot of our fashion choices as we get to, better price points and moderate price points or luxury price points. And it will literally just take the shape of the bell curve. And then by the time you get to the end of the bell curve, the trend has kind of begun to extinguish, and those early influencers and those early adapters are on to whatever the next thing is. Those would
Wow.
That's probably the more, I say, artistic. Like in design school they teach you to pay attention to these things. So I think the artistic way might be to look at this for yourself and make decisions for yourself as to what's in style or what to do next. I think the scientific way would be to approach it from a trend forecasting service.
Very interesting. That's a term I never heard, trend forecasting. And those you mentioned, like top 10 best dressed. Who does that?
It's all opinion based. So usually it's different publications or digital magazines,
I see.
or sometimes even the you'll have red shows that are dedicated to red carpets,
Hmm.
and they have people who are perceived to have good personal style, and they'll have those people hosting the show, and then those people will give their opinion as to who they thought the top 10 best dressed is. A lot of times I find that there is some overlap. So the red carpet show host and, Vogue magazine and
Mm.
some other digital publication might all agree on like 60% of the best dress lists, and then they vary a little bit, but
Hmm.
it's usually just, it's opinion based. It's not really rooted in anything real that you could say you're right to or you're wrong to. It's I like this because I feel blah. Or sometimes I find that people make those lists because they look better than they have in previous years, and not so much that they actually look amazing, but they've just looked so much better than they did 5 years ago that they warrant a place on the list.
Hmm.
I've seen that happen too.
Do you come out with a list?
I used to. I have a blog, and I've had this blog on, like, some I resurrect it like every 8 months. I let it die for 2 months and then I resurrect it again.
Hmm.
When I first started it, I used to do that, and I've gotten away from that in recent years. And I didn't even describe it as 10 best. 10 best dress. I might have just said what my favorites were, because
I
that's
see.
at its core, that's really what it is. They're my favorites.
Hmm.
Or sometimes I would try to transition it to, because I have a swimwear and resort wear website, and that's what I make and sell. I
Yes.
might try to connect the dots and say what we can expect from swimwear because of these 10 best dress on the red carpet.
Hmm. So, what are some fundamental, Nick, some fundamental do's and don'ts of fashion
As a designer or as a consumer wearing it?
as a consumer wearing it?
As a consumer wearing it, I would say do wear what makes you feel beautiful, confident,
Hmm.
comfortable, you know, trend be damned. If
Hmm.
if you I think confidence is the best thing we can put on. So if there's an option between something that you feel really confident and amazing in versus something that doesn't make you feel that way, always choose what makes you feel confident. You're always going to look better when you feel good. Um, I would also say don't buy fast fashion.
What's that mean,
um,
fast fashion?
it's it's a production model that is quite harmful to the economy, to the labor force, to the environment, and
Ah.
it's clothes that are made very quickly and very cheaply. and it's at the expense of the labor force, the
Hmm.
environment, the quality of the product, and as a result, the economy kind of suffers for all of it at the end of it all. Stay away from buying those types of garments,
Hmm.
and I always feel in two minds with that idea because they're often priced so inexpensively that a lot of people buy them because they're cheap
Right.
or because it's a great deal. But the impact on everything that I just mentioned is so much more expensive that it just doesn't even make sense.
Mm.
Um, I would say too, if if we actually look and spend a little bit of time finding what we're looking for, we can probably get something that was less impactful on the workforce, the environment, and the economy, and still allowed us to be kind to our pocketbooks and our wallets,
Hmm.
just with a little bit of research. So I would say, don't shop fast fashion if you can help it. Um,
Never heard that term.
yeah,
Very
it's really, really bad for the environment,
Yeah.
especially, once you, like, are exposed to it and you start looking into it, you'll be like, "Oh my goodness."
Mm.
It creates a ton of pollution and a ton of, like, it kind of borders and on the this whole sweatshop,
Right.
theory, because what you wanna think about is if I'm spending $10 for a shirt, someone had to make it.
Right.
Right? What did they get paid to make this shirt? And we know that there's multiple people from our conversation today that go into the making of products. I'm paying $10 for one shirt, but maybe 8 people were involved in the making of this shirt.
Wow.
What are these people getting paid?
Mm.
If they're not getting paid a living wage, what does that do to the economy?
Right.
Right? If they're making it so cheaply and they don't care about the workforce and they don't care about the economy, now what impact did that have on the environment? Did they throw away the scrap fabric the way that they should? Are there dyes or chemicals that were involved in the making of this garment?
Mhm.
Do we think that the people who made this $10 shirt are actually throwing away the dyes and the chemicals in a way that would
Mm.
be good for our environment?
Mm.
It opens up such a Pandora's box of
Mm.
problems, because of the demand of it. And these companies will, have a very easy cop out and say, "Well, we only make it because people want it."
Right.
But you can control the way you make it, and you can make changes to your production model and to your supply chain because you have the money to do so. You
Mm.
just choose not to do so. So it's I would say definitely stay away from that if you can at all costs. Great alternatives would be, maybe shopping at a thrift store.
Right.
These are garments that have already been made. If you're fortunate enough to have good thrift stores in your area, you can even swap clothes with friends. If your friend is also looking for new pieces and you're looking for new pieces, maybe your friend has something they don't wear anymore and you have
Hmm.
something you don't wear and you can swap. Um, it sounds counterintuitive, but buying better quality goods, they last longer. So
Right.
you don't have to continually replace them. The other thing I would say is that $10 shirt in your lifetime, you're probably going to replace that $10 shirt 10 times, right?
Right.
If you buy a $10 white button-up shirt, how many times are you replacing this shirt?
Mm.
So if you buy a better quality suit or a better quality coat or blazer or jacket, it'll just live in your closet a lot longer and your use per wear in effect could become $10 because of how often you're able to wear it
Interesting. Interesting.
versus only spending $10 on the item. You can only wear it once or twice. It disintegrates in your washing machine and your use per wear is very high in those scenarios. Um, I think
Use
those would
per
probably be
wear.
my 2 things, my do's and don't. Do be confident in what you're wearing. Don't buy fast fashion.
Now, does confidence border on comfortable? I mean, there's a lot of sweatpants at the airport. There's a lot of kind of, bulky kind of, I don't know. I just don't. I don't follow that. I don't prescribe to that. I typically don't wear unless I'm coming from the gym, but we see that a lot.
Yeah.
And what does that have to say? What does that have to say about fashion? That's definitely comfortable for them.
It definitely is. I think that well, I'll say this. When I was a kid growing up, my mom always used to say, "Leave your house so that if you were to meet," at the time she would say the president of the United States, but
Hmm.
fill in the blank, that you wouldn't be embarrassed about your appearance. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean you're wearing a prom dress or a tux, every night. It just means or every time you leave your house. It just means that you've combed your hair, you've brushed your teeth, you've washed your face, and you've put something on that if you were photographed in or ran into someone that you wanted to maybe you're climbing the corporate ladder, or you bump into your favorite star and you take a picture, and you post it on your Instagram, something that you feel okay in, like you don't
Hmm.
you might say, okay, I could have looked better, but I don't look horrible.
Right.
To me, whatever that is for you, that's confident for you.
It's a good rule of thumb. By the way, my jeans are just as comfortable as my sweatpants, by the way. I question the fact that I mean, jeans I have are very comfortable. They stretch, they
100% agree.
it's not like I'm uncomfortable. I'm quite comfortable. I generally wear a blazer and a collared shirt, but I don't really wear the sweatpants or even sometimes I don't mean to pick on it, but sometimes I see like the pajamas, like people wearing pajamas, it
Well, that
seems.
had a whole moment. They were
Yeah.
doing pajamas as, like, legitimate coordinating sets where you had brands like Gucci and Prada and Dior making, like, silk charmeuse pajama-esque pants with matching tops, and then people would wear, their pumps or their high heels with it, and that was the look. And that was very much a trend that was happening. I'm more like you. I wear jeans all the time. I grew up in Florida, and most designers that I know usually have on some sort of jean uniform. It's
Hmm.
usually jeans and a blazer, jeans and a t-shirt, jeans and something. Um, and I'm like every other designer. I have a ton of jeans, and I if it's warm outside, I wear them with tank tops or t-shirts. If it's cold outside, I wear them with sweaters and coats. Like,
Me too.
it's pretty
Me
much
too.
what I live in.
Yeah.
And
And how about sneakers? A lot of the youth today are sneakerheads. They wear a lot of sneakers. I'm of a different generation. I wear shoes, but still, I mean, some look pretty nice.
I love them. For me, it depends on where I'm going. If I'm running
Hmm.
around the garment district, I probably have on Chuck Taylors.
Ah,
I either have a white pair of Chuck Taylors or a black pair of Chuck Taylors, and that's what it is. Still with the jeans and the the t-shirt.
right.
If I am going somewhere that is not running around New York City, then I probably have on a proper shoe or high heel or
Hmm.
sandal, whatever the appropriate footwear is. I dress my jeans up. So if I'm going somewhere nice, I'll wear a dark pair of denim with a
Me
silk
too.
blouse
Hmm.
and a pair of pumps. If I'm going somewhere more casual, then it's probably like my flat sandals, the jeans, and a tank top.
Yeah.
If I'm running around New York City, it's probably my Chuck Taylors, my
Yeah.
jeans, and, like, a sweater of some sort.
And you are not uncomfortable at all.
No, each of those outfits, they're very much me. They
Yeah.
just I make them look different because, there might be a really pretty necklace on or some kind of
Hmm.
blazer or a really pretty blouse or something like that, but to me, at its core, it's still very much my comfortable pair of jeans and a top that I feel comfortable in,
Hmm.
whatever that is for that day.
Very interesting. Same with me. Now, I when we're watching a runway, now I watch your runway of your swimwear, and the ladies look very happy. The swimmer looks great. What should we be looking for when we're watching? I've never been to a live
Ooh.
runway show. What should we be looking for?
Great question. As the consumer, if they're showing products that you would actually be interested in buying,
Hmm.
I would say look at the fit and how they're fitting the models. Do they have a model that has a body type that's similar to you?
Hmm.
That's probably going to be the biggest tell for how it's going to look on your body. If they don't have a model that's a similar size as you, I would say look at the length, if it's a skirt or a pair of pants. where does it stop on the model?
Hmm.
Is it super high above her knee if it's a skirt? Is it super long below her knee, hits her calf, hits her ankle? Length plays a huge part, because on our bodies, most of us are interested in length in some degree because it's a dress you have to wear it to work, or
Right.
you don't want it to be too short to wear to your friend's wedding, or if it's a pair of pants, I like my jeans kind of long, so I don't want a jean that stops too short in my at my calf, because then I think that's a bit too trendy, and I'm not into trends. I try to buy things that are a bit more classic, hence
Mm.
the Chuck Taylors.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
so I would pay attention to all those things. How long are the sleeves? How tight does it fit the model? Usually, the way that we see a garment on a runway is the way that it should fit in
Hmm.
proportion to the body that it's on. So if it's loose on the model, the designer's intention was for it to be a looser style. If it's fitted on the model and it's more tight, the designer's intention was for it to be fitted and tight. So pay attention to proportions and shapes and lengths, I would say, because that
Hmm.
those are the things you're going to notice if and when you actually put this piece on.
Now, when I do see clips of some, I've never sought them out, but usually the women, I seldom see men, but the women are very, very skinny and very tall, and uh, unlike body shapes that, remember, my girlfriend doesn't have that body shape; she has different. I mean, what should we be looking for then when it doesn't match the body shape? I guess is what I'm asking.
Great question. I would say still pay attention to those things, but now the asterisk would just be it's probably going to fit me a lot differently than it
Right.
fits this person. But the general rule of looseness and tightness still apply. If it's
Hmm.
tight on that skinny model, then it's intended to be a more fitted garment. And if it's looser and baggier on her, it's still intended to be a looser, baggier style, even though her body is vastly different than 98% of the population.
So I there's an obvious question here. Why are they using models that are only 2% of the population?
Great question. I think a lot of it has to do with just the origins of fashion. Like, even though fashion is for women in the way that we're probably thinking, a lot of it was started by men, decades ago.
Hmm.
And I think what you see is what men thought women should look like. And that trickles down into marketing and what we see in magazines and on runways and in commercials, and it creates this society of people that think, well, that's the way that we have to look. I think my opinion is just because, back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, those major brands were all men at the helm. Department stores were run and managed by men. They chose the models.
Hmm.
They were the gatekeepers, and those were the tastes that they had. And I think that in our modern society, we see that that changes, thankfully, so that your girlfriend and me and people who have different bodies than that can actually see models that look like real people.
Hmm.
The average size of a woman in the United States is a size 16,
Wow.
and that's average.
It's average, right?
Yeah,
The
so that means
average.
that most people are somewhere, within that number or close to
Hmm.
it. Yet
Hmm.
when we're to your point, when we watch a runway show, we don't see that. I think another reason too, that's one part of it. I think the other part is that depending on the brand that's doing the runway show, a lot of them are also not American brands,
Mm.
and their way of their relationship with food is so different, I think, than what our relationship with food is in this country. When I go to Europe, you know, sometimes people are eating breakfast, sometimes they're not. It's more of a later day culture. So you wake up, you grab a coffee, maybe you smoke your cigarette, you might have a small bowl of fruit, you work for a few hours, you might take a late lunch, and then that turns into a early dinner, and then you eat like your meal. And the views around food and the relationship with food and the views around body types are also a little different.
Wow.
And I think that some of what we see might also be related to that, just depending on the brand that we're looking at.
Hmm. Where is the fashion capital of the world?
They say it's New York, but I think there's a few. I think if you're in the United States, it's New York. I think LA is very much trying to creep up for different categories of clothing. So when you think about like swimwear, casual wear, more lifestyle type stuff, I would say it's probably LA in the United States. I think when you think about more tailored goods, coats, pants, suits, things that are a little bit more structured, it's probably New York.
Hmm.
I think that for Europe, it's absolutely Paris, but London is not to be ignored.
Hmm.
They both have dynamic fashion industries and great designers that come out of both. I mean, I did my internship in London, so for whatever that's worth, there's
Hmm.
absolutely a fashion center there. I think you've got great stuff coming out of Africa and South Africa. Well, Africa is a continent, but some of the countries in Africa are creating really great things, like South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria. They've got great designers that are like emerging from some of those countries. I think Australia has really great, particularly Sydney, has really great competition for Los Angeles. A
Hmm.
lot of the same type of clothing is coming out of both areas. Um, and there's a few brands that I can't remember the names of them right now, but I'll do some digging and I'll see that they're from Australia, and I'm like, "Oh, I
Wow.
love it." One of my favorite brands is an Australian brand, and
Hmm.
they never get it wrong.
Really?
I think it just depends, and I think when we think about a global marketplace, that makes sense because each of these different countries has goods that are unique to those countries. And
Hmm.
I think they're just using what is outside their door and creating beautiful product with it. When I think of I got this sweater that I really wanted forever for Christmas, and I love this sweater. And it's from a UK company, and the wool, you're just not gonna get wool like this, I don't
Really?
think anywhere else, but there's such great sheep
Hmm.
that are in the United Kingdom, and,
Right.
they have a great history of making beautiful sweaters, and, companies like Burberry are based out of London, they invented the trench coat.
Hmm.
There's reasons for that, I think, so I think there's many fashion capitals.
Interesting. You didn't mention Milan.
Milan, why didn't I mention Milan? It's quite industrial from what I hear. I've never
Hmm.
actually been there. It's very, very industrial. I think you have great designers that come out of Italy. I think what Italy is really great at is craftsmanship. But I
Mm.
think that you can get that craftsmanship from the country and not just Milan.
I see.
One of my first sample sewers was a woman from Sicily, and she sews so
Uh-oh.
beautifully, and
Really?
she's not from Milan,
No. Sicily is far from Milan,
but
yeah.
her work is some of the best that I've ever seen. It's beautiful.
Hmm. And no Asian, like there's Tokyo or Shanghai or Hong Kong or
I think that was just me being a bit
Seoul?
short-sighted. I think Singapore has a really great
Singapore.
fashion sense, and when you think about it, Singapore would probably be on that bell curve. They're one of those early stage adapters because there's a lot of wealth in Singapore.
Right.
I think you have countries like Dubai that have great fashion center
Mm,
for the Middle East. I think Tokyo is so amazing with some of their more state of the art approach to
mm,
fashion and some of the tailoring that's coming out of Tokyo. I think there's tons. I think Brazil, could probably rival Sydney and Los Angeles with the swimwear and the resort wear.
that's
You've
right.
got beautiful swimwear that comes out of Colombia as well. Miami also has beautiful
Mm.
swimwear and resort wear. I think in such a global world, there's so many places that get it right. I probably missed a few
Sure,
that
sure. I
that
I don't
deserve to
know.
be on that list.
Yeah, yeah. And you do something unique in that you also help people create fashion companies.
Yes, in a way. So I that part of it you kind of have to know what you want it to be and have your vision and all that kind of sussed out.
Mm,
What I can help the people with is understanding how to do that production component
I
that we
see.
were talking about. And it's important because they already know how to be a designer. They just don't know how to make clothes for more than one person.
Mm,
And if you're an independent designer or you're just starting a brand, there's going to reach a point where you have to, ask yourself, how do I make more than one? Every designer can make one. That's what you learn in school.
hmm.
But if you want a business, you're going to either answer the question, well, if I'm only going to make one, then I'm just going to do custom work and I'll just keep making one. And you have people who have great businesses that only do that. If you want to make more than one, then you're going to have to start to understand production. And most design schools don't teach that bit of the conversation. I talked about production, I think, for one class in my tenure, my matriculation of design school. One day in one class.
Wow.
It wasn't even like a dedicated class. It was like, oh yeah, this happens too. But I think design school trained you to be a designer that would work for a company and not necessarily design school that would teach you how to be a designer of your own company. I think those are two very different things. And what I am helping people to understand is how to manage production so that they can create products for more than one person.
So you're introducing the science to their art, perhaps. Yes. So I'm in the tech industry and it's the opposite that happens. We have these technical people that want to start companies and they know a lot about the science, but as far as relating to other people and sales and marketing, perhaps the art side where you're more interpersonal, they lack. So it's the actual opposite. How does discipline play a role in what you do, Nick Hill?
Oh my goodness. We would not be talking today if I personally didn't own discipline.
Hmm.
I'm one of the most disciplined people I know.
Wow.
I'm I can be very structured. I wouldn't say rigid because I'm also a lot of fun and I think
Hmm.
when you're rigid it just gives the connotation of like not being fun. But I am structured and I do know what needs to happen when in order for the wheels to keep churning smoothly.
Hmm.
I like processes. I love a good contract. I love an SOP. Those are like right.
Standard operating practice, by the way, if anybody's wondering. Yes,
I
I
love
love
those things.
SOPs.
Love
Yes.
them. I
Yeah.
think they're great, but I think that that's, like, higher level discipline. I
Procedure.
I think, in the beginning, it's waking up when you need to, making your bed in the morning, um, being consistent with your routine.
Mm.
And it was funny, I was just saying to my husband yesterday, or my mom, I don't remember who I was talking to, but I was talking to someone, and we were talking about doing the little things with great care. And I was saying, why would God or the universe or whatever you want to subscribe to, why would you get more of anything if you can't do the little things with great care and with
Mm.
accuracy? So I think this is where discipline comes in. We desire so much for ourselves and we have huge dreams and huge goals for ourselves, but that's never where the story starts. The story starts when you are 16 years old as the counter girl at the dry cleaner in your town, and you do that job properly. And because you do that job properly, maybe you meet someone that helps you to get to the next job and to the next and to the next. And as that discipline is observed by the world, I think the gift that it gives us is advancement and the trust that because we did that small thing well, they know that they can trust us to do the big thing well too. But
Hmm.
very rarely do we ever just start out with getting the big thing as a gift from the universe. It happens to some people,
Hmm.
but most people don't start off that way. You usually have to pay your dues and you pay them by being disciplined, by showing up to work on time for that job that you hate or for, having perfect attendance at school or doing the best that you can do simply because your name's attached to the work that's being done. And it's sad, but I think that a lot of that is lost. I'm a talented designer, but I think a lot of what I have achieved in some cases is just because I showed up.
Mm. There is a
And my
famous quote about
uh,
that.
pretty sure.
Yeah,
Um, and my talent helped me once I was there, but
right.
the opportunity existed because somebody didn't set their alarm that day.
Yeah.
Or didn't give themselves enough time on their car ride, or didn't take it seriously. How many times have you heard of a story of, like, a high level executive or someone who has the means to help other people, and they make their choice just based off of the totality of the work ethic.
Right.
You showed up, you did a good job, you were kind, you were pleasant, you were easy to work with. I can see myself working with you.
Mm.
And a lot of times I think that's discipline.
I agree. Yeah, SOP, standard operating procedure, by the way. I said practice. Have you always been disciplined even as a child?
Yes.
Really? Your
Yes,
parents passed it down?
I think so. I'm Jamaican. My parents are Jamaican. I'm first generation, and I can remember when I was learning how to write, like script and cursive, and they sent us home with like these little pieces of paper that had the lines,
Right.
and the L, like if you made an L, it was supposed to touch the top line, but if
Yeah,
you made
yeah.
an I, it touches the middle line.
That's right.
And I can remember my dad helping me, and because I was learning, my letters weren't quite there yet. And he told me, like, "No, that's not the way you should do it. Erase it and do it again." And when I erased it, I didn't erase all of it. So you could still see some of the letter before. And he's like, "If you're going to do it properly. Like whatever you
Mm.
do, just do it properly so you don't have to do it again. Always take pride in your work and always do a good job of what you're doing, even if you don't want to do it." And that was what I was instilled with. Um, there's a bit of I guess, a stereotype of Jamaicans being like hard workers and having like a million jobs. And in my case, that was true. My parents had great work ethic and instilled that in my brother and I. And we have great work ethic. And I don't have kids, but my brother's kids are great workers, and they're little still. I have an older niece and two younger nieces, but when they're playing or when they're doing things, they're tidy about it. They pick up after themselves.
Hmm.
They do the things that we should do but don't always do. And I think that's how you teach kids work ethic. Like when you're done playing, put your toys away, or if you're doing your homework, properly erase so that you don't see what was there before. It's the little things.
What a blessing. What a blessing for you to receive that as a child. That's
I'm very grateful for it.
yeah, great advantage. So how do you measure success?
Huh. I think that is different for everybody. To me, success is being able to be with my family anywhere in the world I want to be. And
Mm.
they can be there with me, and they don't have to worry about how they're going to get there.
Mm.
So if I want to, call my family tomorrow and we take a trip to Bali, to me that would be success.
Wow.
And I have people who can keep running my company, but I can spend whatever type of time with my family wherever I want to in the world,
Hmm.
as
Whew.
often as I want.
Right. Took a deep breath. That sounds wonderful. Do
In my
you need to
stories of success, like whenever I talk to my sister-in-laws or my friends, I always say, "One day we're gonna look back on this moment, drinking our drinks. One of us is gonna have a drink and a pineapple, the other one's gonna have a drink and a coconut, and we're gonna be on a lounge chair by the pool in Bali, and we're gonna look back at this moment and laugh."
Hmm.
I always say that, and I envision it, and, to me, that will be success.
That sounds wonderful.
I think so.
That sounds absolutely wonderful, especially now in the winter.
Right?
Has the pandemic affected fashion?
Yes. I think that it brought about some of the inequities and inequalities that we were talking about. I
Mm.
think that fashion became a little bit more aware that it's probably not as sustainable as it thought it is or wants to be. I think that it identified a little bit of how much of a relic it can be. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, so like end of March, beginning of April, Vogue magazine had well, the CFDA, which is the like the fashion authority. It's like a fashion association, and they kind of are like the nucleus of fashion. Like if
Really?
you're yeah, it's like a major organization and people are members of this organization and they have a newsletter that goes out every week or every day or whenever the frequency is and it's a very prestigious organization and I'm sure written them a million times for one reason or another and they had a webinar about what needs to change in fashion as we enter this new age. And it very much does need an overhaul. And
Hmm.
I think 2020 exposed the lack of technology that's in fashion. And that gets questionable because a lot of that is access to funding by the brand itself or the supplier itself. And these are all a bunch of small businesses, and some have more resources than others. Um, I think it brought about questions of a lot of sustainability and like what we're doing with the planet because of the impact that happened initially with COVID. A lot of people were in the middle of producing orders for spring or summer, and the supply chain got fractured. And I
Yeah.
think that it was very evident that like maybe the way that we're doing things isn't the best way to do things. I don't know that fashion as an industry has come up with a solution. I think that more questions have been raised as a result. But I think the benefit of questions is that conversations are happening and people are actively, hopefully, working on changing some of the things that we're seeing. I think since then, what we've noticed are brands like, and this could be a bit like greenwashing, but I think we've seen brands like H&M or Forever 21
Hmm.
have a chief sustainability officer. I think Forever 21 announced a chief sustainability officer about a month or so ago. H&M has been on this campaign to be more sustainable and to
Good.
have a sustainability collection. And I think that's the trickle down effect of some of the talks that were happening early on in 2020. As a small brand, I feel like I'm naturally sustainable because I'm always worried about spending what I don't have or
Mm.
I can see the effects of my decisions I think a little bit more easily than some larger companies can. And for my piece of it, I've always made my product in America and my intention is to do so as long as the company is around. I give back to my local communities by creating my product in America.
Hmm.
I do a lot of work in New York City's garment district. My sample room is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I just hired a new factory to produce my garments for wholesale out in Los Angeles.
Wow.
So I am contributing to each of those local economies and to the people that are working in those local economies. But
Good
I
for
think
you.
one of the biggest benefits of producing domestically in the United States is that our laws and regulations as far as labor laws are a little bit more strict
Hmm.
and the laws that are surrounding disposal of chemicals and things are also a little bit more regulated and it's also just easier to manage at this stage of the game. I can call or email someone and I know that I'll get a response today because LA is only 3 hours behind.
Right.
Whereas if I was manufacturing in any other country, it can be hard. At my old job, our factories were all in China, and if we had a meeting, well, not all, but many were all in China, and if we had to have a meeting, my options were either come in at 8 a.m. or leave at 8 p.m. because 7 and 8 were kind of the magical times with a 12-hour difference.
Wow.
And you hate it if you're the 7 a.m.er.
Really?
Yeah, because getting at work at 7 means that you're waking up at like 5:30.
Right. Right. Getting on the train, getting there. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Nic Hyl, for your time today. I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes, and please continue to live beautifully.
Thank
And
you.
yes, and I really enjoyed our time. How can we get in touch with you? I love your content. I went through it even as a novice, I guess I should say. I enjoyed learning a lot from your sites and of course talking to you. How can we get in touch with you?
Thank you so much, Joe. My website is www.nichyl.com, and that's NICHYL.com. And from there, that's kind of like the main hub. You can find everything from there. So if you're interested in learning how to master your product development and production, you can click on the little link that says Nic Hyl Fashion University, and it will take you there. If you're struggling with self esteem or body image issues, you can click on the link that says Living Beautifully or You're Living Beautifully. I forget what it says right now.
YourLivingBeautifully.com. Yes.
You'relivingbeautifully.com, and that will take you to a free 30-day challenge that I have to help you to begin to improve the way you speak to yourself and build that confidence that we need, I think, in life. And if you want to find me on Instagram, it's at Nic Hyl Clothing. And between the website and Instagram is pretty much where I am most of the time on social media.
Nick, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And if I'm in the city, perhaps we can all get together and have a cup of coffee.
Yes, I love that. I love coffee.
Yes, and I'll be the one in the blazer and jeans.
And I'll be the one in the jeans and Chuck Taylors with a sweater.
You have a great day. You be well. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.